What's up, y'all? It's your boy Brandon Dulos Garrett, and I'm back with another episode of Brandon's Book Report. I have another amazing book for y'all, Dopamine Nation by Anna Lemke. She is a psychiatrist and she treats patients for addiction. So what is addiction? It doesn't have to just be drugs or alcohol. It could be food. It could be social media, pornography, video games. Anything can become an addiction. Anything that keeps you from the present. In the last episode of Brandon's book report, we talked about the body keeps the score. And one of the biggest lessons that I took away from that was that anything that doesn't keep you present is going to be a problem. We spend so much energy subconsciously running away from ourselves, from not being in the here and now. And maybe that's because you're not happy with your job. You're not happy with your relationship. You're not just satisfied where you're at in life. Or maybe you went through some things and now you're just trying to find anything to escape this reality. You know, there's always music to listen to. There's always a video to watch. There's always food to eat, another thing to inhale to get yourself out of here and make yourself feel better. But it becomes such a slippery slope. Everything is so readily available to us. We used to have scarcity in life, but now we have abundance. Back in the day, you know, when we were living in tribes and stuff, if you wanted food, you had to go get it. You had to go pick something. You had to go hunt. If you wanted to be warm, you had to cut down a tree for firewood. You know, but now that all our needs are met, and that's such a great, fortune to have, especially in Western civilization, anything you need, you can probably get, even if you have lack of money. But what happens is we abuse these things and we overindulge. Anything you want is on your phone, you know what I mean? You can have it ordered to you. You can pull it up and look at it, you know what I mean? You get it at a snap of a finger. And that's such a good thing, but at the same time, if you are just stuck on whatever gets you that next high, you'll eventually hit a ceiling and you'll have to come down eventually. And then you find out things don't hit the same anymore. Once you encompass your entire life and your entire meaning around pleasure, then eventually you're going to hit a wall, and because you can only have so much pleasure in this life. So that's why addiction can be very destructive, because now your whole life is seeking pleasure. There is an idea that she presents, which is the pleasure-pain balance. We all have equilibrium and homeostasis. So it's like a teeter-totter on the playground. One side you have pain, one side you have pleasure. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And it's the same with our bodies and our minds. The more you press on one side, the more eventually the other side's going to come and counteract with that. And that's because, back in the day when you needed something, you needed the motivation to go get it. It felt good when you got it, but eventually you needed that pain to get you to go do it again. So it felt good when you brought an animal back to your tribe. Everyone was celebrating, you're about to eat, but eventually those hunger pains are going to come back and you got to go out and get another animal or pick something else to keep it going. It's a survival mechanism. And so the more you press on one side, the more it's going to counteract. And often, we press only on the pleasure side. And once we build up a tolerance to something, that pain comes setting back in. And now we don't feel right. We feel empty. We feel out of order. And we're just going to run to something else that's a little bit stronger to open up those reward pathways in our brain so that the dopamine receptors can now exchange between your synapses and neurons. So it's very fascinating on an anatomy level how the brain works once again, like in the last video. I love this kind of stuff, man. She talks about how to implement different strategies to overcome addiction. It's not going to be a force of will. It's such a horrible, messed up thing to say to an addict, oh, why don't you just stop? Like, if it was that simple, I think people would stop. I don't think people would consciously go to the extent to chase a substance or chase something that's going to ruin their lives or eventually take their own life out of the whole equation altogether. So in order to navigate addiction, you have to implement right strategies. These strategies that she talks about are called self-binding. There's different types. So you have physical self-binding, which is space. You have to be able to separate yourself from the thing you're addicted to. So if you're addicted to food like me, then you can't have sweets in the house. You're going to eat them. If you're addicted to alcohol, you shouldn't be at a bar. You shouldn't have these things in your vicinity so easily in your reach. So you need to get them away from you as much as possible. Maybe you're up all night on your phone. You need to put your phone in a different room. These are just different examples of physical binding. You have chronological binding, which is time. These are for people who maybe don't have such a severe addiction, but they can recognize this can be a problem if I don't nip it in the butt. So like maybe you only drink on the weekends. Maybe you tell yourself, I'm going to only be on my phone 1 hour a day. And maybe you put one of those screen locks and timers on your phone to tell you that you need to put this up after a certain amount of time. So that's a chronological binding, which is time. And then you have categorical self-binding, which has to do with identifying your triggers, figuring out what's going to make you stumble and get it out of the way before you actually get to relapsing. So, if you're addicted to pornography, maybe you need to stay away from R-rated movies, stay off Instagram where there's a lot of half-naked women. Maybe, if you're an alcoholic, you shouldn't be by a liquor store, by a bar. It's just different things you have to implement to keep yourself away from that. The idea is, there's a line you don't want to cross. Now, do you want to try to get as close to the line as you can, or stay away as far as you can? I think the latter is, the more ideal thing, because you'll find any excuse to relapse and give yourself a pass, and then you're back to step one. You know what I mean? She talks about one of her patients who was sober from alcohol for 4 years, and she was in AA. She had a sponsor and everything, and she went to Italy. And because she didn't speak the language very well, she bought a beverage, and she found out that it actually had alcohol in it when she got someone to read it for her. It only had like 2% of alcohol. She said she didn't even get buzzed, but she obviously, as part of one of the 12 steps, you want to be honest with your sponsor. So she contacted her sponsor and told him what happened. And even though it was an accident and it was a minor percentage of alcohol, he pretty much told her, you need to reset your sobriety date now. You got to start over. You're no longer 4 years in. You're back to 0. And even though that sounds like such an overcorrection, or it's really that big a deal, I think there's something beautiful to really taking that this recovery so seriously that you would do something like that. So I just thought that was a very interesting idea when it comes to recovery. She talks about how medicine and balance can be a slippery slope, because there are people who do abuse drugs, especially even antidepressants or opioids, benzodiazepines. You can abuse all these things. But she also recognizes that even as a psychiatrist who subscribes these people these things, that it can be a slippery slope. Some people do have chemical imbalances and they need these things to function, and these medicines have drastically improved their life. But there's some people, like one of her patients she talks about, where he did so much drugs in his life, he needs opioids just to feel normal. He claims he doesn't even get high off them anymore, but he needs them to feel normal. But she talks about how, you do trade something. Every addiction, you have to trade a piece of yourself to have that high, or to have that equal, middle ground that some people with chemical imbalances need. She talks about one of her patients who has depression, and she takes SSRIs, to regulate herself. But when she takes her medicine, she realizes she really can't get emotional anymore. She said she didn't even cry at her own mom's funeral. So she does recognize how it is such a hard thing, that sometimes the world fails us. And so we need to have a substance to make ourselves feel comfortable in this messed up world. And it's just so tragic when you think about it. I don't know how she does that job. It has to be so hard. On the back half of this book, she flips the script, and she talks about, if you press on the pleasure side, eventually the pain will come. So the idea is to press on the pain side as much as you can, and you'll get the pleasure. And that's so true. When you work out, you get endorphins. If you run, you get that runner's high. She talks about ice baths and taking cold showers, and how that actually improves your immune system and helps you feel better mentally. And I thought that was so interesting. But she even talks about how that is even a slippery slope for some people. She talks about how one of her patients was addicted to ice baths. So when you get an ice bath, if you sit still, eventually your body temperature will heat you up to a certain extent. So he went so crazy with it, where he made a machine under a freezer where it would constantly stir the ice. So as long as the water was moving, he was always cold. And he was talking about he was doing it like 2 or 3 times a day because he just became addicted to it. She talks about how some athletes have what's called overtraining syndrome, where they work out so much that they no longer get pleasure or endorphins from working out. And in fact, they actually feel sad and empty when they do work out. And I just thought that was crazy, and I wonder if that works the same for Olympic athletes. Their whole lives and whole livelihood are peak performance. And I wonder if that's why they get caught up in, taking substances and they get banned, you know what I mean? Or maybe they get on steroids because they need something to help them feel normal. And because, their occupation and livelihood and their craft is depending on this physical activity and they don't get anything out of it anymore. I think that's so crazy, you know what I mean? That anything can be a drug. She talks about one of the best ways to overcoming addiction is what she calls radical honesty. And she learned this mostly from AA. The first step to AA is admitting you have a problem. Everyone has seen on TV, that's like the first thing they always talk about in the 12-step program. And I think it's so important. You have to learn how to be honest with yourself. If you can't be honest with yourself, you're going to constantly live in an illusion that you're good, you know what I mean? It's so hard to admit that you have a problem to other people, but I think it always is hardest with yourself. If you can't be real with yourself, then you can't be real with others, you know what I mean? When you can admit you have a problem, you need help, that you're human, I think that opens the door for recovery. That's a very important first step. The Bible says the truth will set you free. And I think that's so true. When you can be honest with the people around you and people realize that you're human, I think that helps you be more comfortable in your own skin. It makes you more confident. And it gives you more support from the people around you when you are honest. We have a stupid narrative in our heads that if I'm honest, if people see me for who I really am, then they're not going to accept me. They're not going to like me. And that's a real fear a lot of people have. But what we find out is it's usually the opposite. Real always recognizes real. If you can be honest and vulnerable with other people, they're going to see themselves in you and they're going to actually admire your honesty. They're going to trust you more because they know that if you're honest with yourself, that you can be honest with them. And I just thought that was such a beautiful idea. She even goes into broken promises and addiction, that when you have children and they grow up and you break promises with them, they're actually going to become impulsive and they're going to be more prone to addiction in the future. Because when you are honest with your kids and you don't break your promises, then they're going to understand that they're going to have a mindset where the world is comfortable, that the world is orderly, that you can navigate this and that things eventually will work themselves out, that you don't have to run to something else. It's so sad to think that if we as caretakers or as parents aren't able to give our kids a comfortable life and let them understand that they can come to us and that they can trust us for help, that they're going to run to anything that gives them ease, you know what I mean? And I just thought that was so sad. It goes to the plenty versus scarcity mindset. If you break your promises to your kids constantly, they're going to have a mindset that life is scarce, that I don't have a lot, with a lot at my disposal. So I need to find that quick fix as fast as I can because it's going to be gone tomorrow. If you have a plenty mindset, though, you realize, yes, things are hard, but this too shall pass. I have support. I have love. I have ease somewhere in my support group, or life will work itself out eventually. You know what I mean? I just think that was such an interesting idea. Man, psychology is so mind-blowing, guys. She talks about destructive shame versus pro-social shame. Anytime we relapse or we have an addiction, we often find shame. It's so hard to admit you have a problem. It's so defeating to think that this one thing, is derailing my whole life. And sometimes when you go find help or look for help, you sometimes don't get it. Sometimes you go to church and, they don't know how to properly counsel you or give you good advice or good prayer. Sometimes you get ostracized, you know what I mean? And you get condemned because, it goes back to what we were talking about where people say, well, just quit. You know what I mean? Sometimes you just don't get the help you need. And because of that, you'll find yourself lying, so that either lying to yourself or lying to people around you to pretend you no longer have that problem or you never had that problem ever. And because we lie, we find ourselves in isolation. And when we're in isolation, that's usually when we're going to overindulge, because we're social creatures. We're mammals. We need to exist in groups. And when we isolate from other people, that's when we lose ourselves, and that's when we fall more prone to addiction. But there's something called, and that's called destructive shame, that vicious cycle. When we're not getting the support or help we need, when we're not honest with ourselves, it's going to constantly circulate. But there's pro-social shame, which is often found in AA or maybe a good church, where you can be honest with people. And because you're honest, you're actually rewarded for that. People are going to cling to you more. People are going to be there for you. People are going to pray for you or, hit you up and make sure you're good. And you want that pro-social honesty because it's going to break the cycle. You're going to have an addiction that you overindulge in. You're going to find shame. You're going to confess to and look for help. And if you get that help, you're going to find accountability. You're going to find a new path. And I just think it's so beautiful when you find that support group and that accountability, because it really shows you that the greatest source of dopamine is other people and good relationships. We forget that people are a resource. We're animals, we're mammals, we are made to exist in groups. And I just think that there's nothing that can replace that kind of intimacy. When you're with your kids, when you're with your family, when you're with good friends, that's when I feel the best. When I have really good people that I can trust and that I can laugh with and that I can do real life with. I think that's the greatest source of dopamine that no drug or substance or food can ever replace. And I think there's something going on in our world where we are losing that part of ourselves. And I just hope that we can finally realize that we need each other in this world. Another thing that she talks about is, immersing yourself in the world instead of trying to escape it. She talks about one of her patients who was addicted, and he was addicted to smoking weed a lot. So, and it messed up his entire college career. And she talks about how he would go on hikes to get away from, wanting to get high. But eventually that became a time he would get high too. So he was like, I have no way out. And he was really feeling defeated. And I think she said he even got suicidal over it. But she said what he did was he took a camera with him when he went hiking. And he started taking very close-up, intricate pictures of leaves and bugs, which was a really weird, specific thing. But she said he became so immersed in this that it actually helped him break his addiction or help him ease, the need to want to get high. And I thought that was so beautiful. I always say, God has created us in his image. We have a piece of God, characteristics of God inside of us. And one of the biggest things God is a creator. So when we create things, when we make music, when we make songs or rap or draw, whatever you can create, whatever you can immerse yourself in and invest your time in and spend it more wisely instead of, to find pleasure. I think that's when we can really find something more in this life. And I just thought that's so cool and so beautiful. To really immerse ourselves in this world instead of trying to escape it. I want to leave you with one passage that Anna writes at the end of this book. It's on the last couple pages, but I thought it was so beautiful, and it was the perfect way to cap off this book. And I hope that you don't take anything away, you take this away. She says, I urge you to find a way to immerse yourself fully in the life that you have been given, to stop running from whatever you're trying to escape, and instead to stop and turn and face whatever it is. Then I dare you to walk toward it. In this way, the world may reveal itself to you as something magical and aspiring that does not require an escape. Instead, the world may become something worth paying attention to. Thank you guys so much for listening, man. I really love doing these book reviews. Please send me book recommendations. And I really urge you that if you have an addiction that you're battling with, check out this book and reach out for help. Anyone is willing to listen, I promise you. I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to offer prayer and just a good ear, you know what I mean? I'll never tell you that you suck, because we're all struggling. And I hope that you can find some light in this dark time that you're in. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time on Brandon's Book Report.